Okay.
Okay. Yeah, you happy?
Yeah.
Okay, so today I'd like to talk about Kaizen. What, you may be asking, oops, which is the voice? Oh, okay, what? Just gonna sort of beep at me. Oh, that's because I've got it upside down. Okay, I'll stop again, because otherwise that's ridiculous. Right, today I'd like to talk about Kaizen. What you may be asking yourself is Kaizen. Kaizen is a process of continuous improvement, and it is a term that is borrowed from the Toyota production system. So if you remember, we talked about lean and Toyota and waste kind of before Christmas, so that came up then. So just to recap the Toyota production system, it's sometimes represented as this kind of little house, is that there are these whole load of things that kind of combine together. So Toyota production system is about being an ongoing philosophy rather than just a kind of one-off discrete program of improvement. It's about continuous improvement, the philosophy of Kaizen. It's about being a responsive learning organization, having a purpose and coming to a point of global optimization. So within this Kaizen, continuous improvement, this is kind of how it works. First you have to have a goal, and then a process follows from here. You decide a metric that allows you to measure whether or not you've achieved that goal. You try and take some action to move you towards it. You measure where you are after that action in terms of your metric. You change direction from there, and then you repeat. And this cycle goes around like this, and this is the cycle of kind of continuous improvement. This is a basic sort of learning feedback process. But a useful question to ask is, how do we know which goals we should pick? And how do we know which metrics are the best one to assign to them? And actually the interesting thing about the Toyota system when you look at it as a whole is that all of these parts interlink and they all actually rely on each other. So the way that we know whether or not we've chosen the right goals is because we're a purpose-driven organization. We have that kind of sense of a long-term vision. The way in which we know if we're choosing the right measures is because we have a kind of culture of global optimization. And I'll come back to this later when I talk about the idea of kind of actionable measures later on, so look out for that. The interesting thing about Toyota, or one of the interesting things, is that there are actually two of these kind of goal outcome Kaizen loops within the way that they work. One is the kind of longer term loop of looking at where are we in terms of the long-term vision for the company, and the other is a kind of shorter term loop on iterative cycles saying where are we with a short-term goal that's kind of more actionable. So this is a slide that you might have seen before, and this is another slide that you might have seen before a couple of times, and this North Star, this is the long-term goal. You know, so I'm going to set out for something, I think it's going to have this measurable impact, and I'm going to keep doing that, and each of those things is calibrated in terms of the direction for the long-term strategy of the business, the true north. So another thing to consider about this loop of learning, right? I'm going to set a goal, I'm going to measure it, I'm going to try stuff, I'm going to see what happens, I'm going to come back. This might look familiar, particularly to Justin maybe. I think he might be someone who's got some familiarity here, and it might help underline the familiarity if I make this one change to it. Instead of having the word change, I have the word pivot. Pivot is obviously quite a fashionable word, and one of the reasons is because it's from the lean startup, right? Well, they particularly use the word pivot. And this process of learning, like learning and changing in this way, this is the basic process that the lean startup suggests for an organization. Now, that's not just coincidence. Right, we started out with this loop of the Kaizen of the Toyota system, and now I'm saying, oh, it's basically the same loop in the book, The Lean Startup, and that kind of method, and that's because Toyota and Lean are intimately linked. If you go to the Lean Enterprise Institute, they say that Toyota's production system is a kind of lean system, but the term and concept of lean, the kind of explicit term and concept, was coined in the 1980s by a team at MIT who were studying Toyota. So the kind of two go together. So the pivoting in the kind of lean system is kind of like the continuous improvement idea in the Toyota system. Looking in a little bit more detail about what the kind of lean startup methodology is, it is about this process of build, measure, learn. So they say that an organization or a company's a team or an organization's effectiveness is determined by its ability to come up with ideas, quickly build the minimum viable product, measure its effectiveness in the market, and learn from that experiment. But I think the kind of really powerful concept that comes out of the lean startup that you don't really get anywhere else is the idea of the MVP not being the kind of minimum feature set needed to perform a certain function, but being the minimum feature set needed, the smallest possible product to help you get feedback on whether or not you're doing the right thing. Yeah, it is defined as, so the MVP is defined as the version of a new product which allows a team to collect the maximum amount of validated learning about customers with the least effort. So that's a really interesting thing to think about when we're starting to try new things, thinking, actually, what is the thing that we want to measure here? How are we going to work out whether this has been a success? And what's the quickest way that we can get to some solid feedback about whether or not this is the path that we should be going down, so that we're continually asking ourselves this question on a regular, iterative basis, pivot or persevere, pivot or persevere. And the idea of pivot, and I think where this kind of jargon comes from, for me is a little bit like this kind of, in the box, out of the box kind of thing, that they just sort of, like picked a word that didn't have like too much kind of emotional resonance. Because the point about pivoting is about saying, do we fire the plan or not? Like traditional organizations say, oh, this didn't work. Do we fire the CEO? Do we fire the person who came up with this idea or not? And here it's about saying, actually, it's a valid outcome, because it's an experiment, to have discovered, yeah, we tried that and it was the wrong thing to do. So what are we going to do with that lesson? It's like, where's that going to lead us to doing the right thing? And actually we say that people who have set up an experiment from which they've learned something which was it was a bad idea have not failed. It's also really important, another thing coming out of Lean Startup, to choose the right measure. And they have this kind of distinction between actionable measures and vanity measures, which I mentioned earlier on. So, like they say, a typical vanity measure that kind of startups will have will be something like number of new users per day. And you'd be like, oh, we're having this huge volume of new users every day, we're doing really, really well. And they're like, but if it costs you money to do the marketing to generate those new users, and all you're interested in is this kind of constant round of new sign-ups, that might actually lead you to bankruptcy as you continue to spend on attracting new users to achieve this outcome. But actually there might be something else that you should be looking for, like retained users, or like something kind of more useful. Now, one of the things about the Lean Startup book is it's very much focused on software, right? And the idea of kind of lean development and agile development is often very software focused. I think it's interesting to observe that that doesn't have to be the case. And in fact, even in the context of software, we can be looking not just at a kind of development cycle and using this kind of like Kaizen process for a product as a whole. You can do it on a smaller level for an individual feature, but you can also do it on a larger level to the kind of structures or right the way up to a whole organization. In fact, I would argue that you can apply this process of set a goal, attach a measure, try something, see where you are with the measure, and then recalibrate to any process of any size. So I think it's just a way of getting stuff done effectively and efficiently if you get into that mindset of saying, what's the MVP, how do we quickly get to useful feedback? Not only is it more than just software, right, it's more than just lean. So some other names for kind of this technique: validated learning, that's what this process is. It's about, like having some data which allows you to learn in a clear way, to know what you're learning. Science or scientific inquiry, right? This is how scientists go about stuff. They set out a hypothesis and they go and do some experiments. Or fundamentals last week, Richard mentioned cybernetics. Cybernetics is about kind of network feedback, essentially. One of the, and particularly this concept of closed controllers. So a closed controller is something which not only knows how it's operating, it understands the changes in state that are happening as a result of what it's doing. That makes sense? Right, so a motor, for instance, is an open controller by and large, because a motor just knows what speed it's going at. You tell it, go at a certain speed, it goes at speed. But you can set up like control systems which actually say, do this as long as the product is coming out in a certain way. So building in those kind of feedback cycles so that you get this loop, so that you know what you're acting on. And actually last week, thinking when we were talking about visual management, and I mentioned the idea that there were two ways that visual management might help us in particular, one of which was, in fact, maybe I'm about to introduce these on the next slide, but oh yeah, application number one of visual management is the visualized workflow. And actually there it is, right? There is the draft of the visualized workflow. So something concretely has happened in the last week to move us forward on this. This is a kind of like closed controller. Or rather, this is part of making a cycle of feedback. Because what this allows you to do is, as a whole team, to see the impact of what you're doing on the work of the whole team. It's quite easy to see a kind of local sense of your impact. You could look at the stuff you've ticked off your to-do list, or that you touched particular documents and that you did stuff to them that improved them, whether that's adding stuff or running stuff through or checking somebody else's stuff. But actually seeing what's the global situation. Remember that thing, the kind of the values of the total production system, which includes that value of global optimization, not just local optimization. So actually creating the feedback loop so you can see, as a result of what you're doing, what's happening with the work. Are we moving it towards the true goal, which is to get it to the end of the board, the point at which we get paid and the client gets paid? So that's kind of one real world application of this Kaizen process of closing this feedback loop. Actually the other thing that comes out of this is that as we work with the visualized workflow, we're able to take away a sense of the measures that we want to put into place. Right? At the moment, this does give us sort of something that we can measure in a non-quantitative way. We can say, well, we just want to measure things moving across the board. But actually starting to understand how does what I did today impact total cost of delay on our workflow? And what sort of cost of delay calculation do we want to do? Right, cost of delay is a really super useful concept, and when we did the GrantTree fundamentals about it last year, it was really resonant, people were quite excited about it, but then it's hard to know, okay, well, how do we actually work with that on a daily basis? Stephen could have given us some suggestions, but working out where to put them and what to do with them and actually how to make that happen, surfacing the workflow kind of helps us those questions and make use of that knowledge. And actually when we were looking at this yesterday in the CM workshop, Mike made the point, which was, the thing nearest the end is not always going to be the most urgent if you have a thing that's sitting at the start that has to file by the end of the week. And that's one of the things that cost of delay does for you, is it allows you to see, because there's this kind of cliff that this is going to fall off, this piece of work at the start is the most urgent piece. So there were two things that I mentioned last week about how we might use visual management, one of which is the visualized workflow, and the other of which is the balanced scorecard. And again, just like the visualized workflow, the balanced scorecard is an example of something that forms part of this kind of Kaizen process, this kind of way of seeing the impact that we're having, setting up measures and learning. So the balanced scorecard is a management tool that observed in the 90s, and the kind of this trend of emergent strategy, which is, rather than saying, oh, we will set the detailed strategy of our organization for the next 5 years and, spiral bind it and give it out to everybody. Instead, we will have a kind of longer term vision, and we will learn about the kind of specifics and the details as we go. Learning by doing, learning as we go. And it's also about a kind of a trend around this time in kind of management thinking about the importance not just of relying on the kind of traditional financial reports, the management accounts, the profit and loss, balance sheet, etc., but actually looking at some of the non-financial costs and also the non-financial benefits that that an organisation has when it tries something out. So it's gone through a number of cycles, the kind of number of generations, the balanced scorecard, and I think it's interesting to look at those to kind of see that evolution to understand where it is. So the first version that existed was this, and the idea was that you have, across 4 different horizons, you have 20 or perspectives as they call them here. You have kind of 20 or so different goals, each of which has a measure attached to it. So you have the traditional financial goals, but you also look at how does this impact the kind of structural, cultural, operational piece, which they call the internal business perspective. How does this impact our relationship with our customers? And how does this impact the way that we're innovating and learning? So, this is basically saying it's not just about the money, it's about the kind of broader picture of the impact of stakeholders, but also starting to recognize the fact that in order to achieve your financial goals, you have to have goals in these other areas as well. Because actually, well, what do we need from our customers in order that we can make money? And then what do our customers need from us in order that we can get that from them? So I think this is also an interesting flow if you take it from kind of learning to process to customer to finance. Because if you think about organizations, we learn, and from learning we change our structures, and then the bigger thing that happens there is that our products and our customer relationship changes, and then the bigger thing that happens there is that we achieve financial success. So I think there's a really nice tool in that format, but it was kind of ready to evolve. And the second generation starts to look a little bit more like this. So what this does is it puts these linkages between the various objectives that you're setting. So whereas the first version shows you both the goals and the measures and maybe has quite a bit of detail on that, from the second version onwards, on the kind of main map, you just have a little headline for each of the objectives, and then you have a supporting document in which you have a bit more detail. But these linkages are really important, right? This is a great example of system thinking. It's starting to say, if we want to achieve this, what's it dependent on? Well, it's dependent on this and this and this, and plotting out these various dependencies. And actually, I think that there's some stuff around this called there's a sort of like a system thinking technique that you can do. There's a kind of visual vocabulary for working this way. And I think I think of it as being called rebalancing loops. I will send around a link on People and Culture afterwards. And it may be actually that if people have a look at that we might want to do a GrantTree fundamentals on that in the future, because it might be a really useful skill for us. But one of the things that you see is how these things kind of fit together, right? So you get a sense of, is this a coordinated whole? Are there things in here that actually, if I do this bit, it will actually negatively impact that bit? Is it a well-balanced plan? Is it all leading to the kind of thing that we have as our ultimate goal? But it also allows us to see where should we start. If we're going back to thinking about the MVP, where should we start gathering data? Which objective should we begin with? Where can we leverage? Where is the place that's going to start moving things most quickly? And it kind of lays it out in a way that allows you to start to think about and discuss that. So there was the next evolution to the third generation is basically the same as this. It continues to have this kind of linkage map of objectives, but it adds what they call the destination statement, which is like a kind of the vision for a year and a day. It's at some specific point in time and what we want the organisation to look like and how it's going to be different from it is now. And one of the reasons why they say it's important to add this is because this helps you do two things. One, it helps you have multiple different kind of strategic initiatives, each with its own balanced scorecard, which are kind of coordinated because they all form part, they all sit, in moving you towards your destination statement. You don't have to sort of try and build like a meta-balanced scorecard in which you join them together. You just know that they form part of this, and therefore that they're probably working in a kind of complementary way. It also makes sure that you're choosing the right objectives, because you think, well, are the objectives that I'm choosing feeding into the destination that I want to get to? So by having put together the linkages in this way, you give yourself a good sense of where to start and what to measure, and this gives you a good sense of which objectives to choose and how to coordinate various initiatives. There's then a kind of slight refinement that comes on from that, which is that actually if you have this destination statement, if in that you say, well look, this is where we're going to be financially, this is where we're going to be with our customers, this is where we're going to be operationally, this is where we're going to be in terms of sort of learning, growth, culture, people, then actually you've got those four perspectives already in that statement. And so what happens is that you can then produce, and some people do it kind of differs, a scorecard in which you actually just have two perspectives here of activities and outcomes. So there's this kind of evolution of a tool for thinking about and laying out your strategy and what you're doing. Now I think it's interesting to kind of just draw back on something here, which is this sense that actually, there's kind of nothing new under the sun. So, the balanced scorecard, which emerged from kind of academic thinking about management particularly these kind of two professors at Harvard Business School, you know, in the 90s, is really just sort of reiterating the stuff that exists in the Toyota system and has been there since the 60s, you know? So you have the destination statement is like the true north of the Toyota production system. The kind of objectives and measures of the scorecard are like the kind of goal metrics, you know, the kind of continuous improvement cycle. And I also think that this is an interesting idea, that the idea of emergent strategy, learning and doing, evolutionary organizations, evolutionary purpose, you know, these ideas have kind of been around in different forms for a while. So it's interesting to note that, you know, like stuff in open culture is not necessarily as new or as weird as we think it is. Why might we want to use the balanced scorecard as part of what we're doing? Well, firstly, as I've already said, it allows us to look at the non-financial costs and benefits of our strategic work, not just the financial ones, right? So it kind of broadens our perspective. That's a way of thinking about that. But it also is a great way of standardizing strategy. If you have everything on a balanced scorecard, just as when you've got the visual management of the workflow, right? By standardizing the cards, you can kind of step back and get a sense of, you know, what's happening. Here you could have the various kind of strategic organizational improvement things out, each with their balanced scorecards, so you can look at them and compare them and talk about them and make decisions about which ones you want to use. But also, as I said, because you have that wonderful kind of mapping where you have the factors linking into each other, you can start to structure conversations about where we should start, where we can apply leverage, what's the strongest thing to do. So where are we now, right? This fits into last week's talk about visual management, because these kind of visual management tools, I think, are a really important part of the Kaizen process. So part of what I want to take away from today, and what we've done since then is obviously we've put the workflow stuff up. Part of what I wanted to talk about today was specifically the kind of balanced scorecard as a tool, and introduce that and that as a way of working, to extend that stuff about visual management and start like looking at ways that we could put that into practice. But I also wanted to introduce the idea of this kind of Kaizen process, of the learning process, and start to say we should have this available to us as a tool for thinking about any piece of work that we want to do. And we should start saying, oh, you know, I wonder if I could measure whether or not this is going to be a success, and I wonder how quickly I could get to some data for that measurement. You know, life is full of things to do. Economics is the study of basically how you act under scarcity. Time, at the very least, is a scarce resource that we have. We have to choose how to use it. So saying, okay, I don't know if this piece of work is going to be successful, but what I'll do is maybe I'll time box it for 15 minutes. And if I've got some data after 15 minutes about whether or not it looks like it's going to be something worth doing, I'll carry on for another 15 minutes. If after the first 15 minutes it looks like it's going to be fruitless, then I'll stop. Getting into that mindset of pivot, persevere, I think is a really powerful kind of thinking skill for us all to have individually as an organisation. So that was what I wanted to share today. But it would be great to now get people's kind of thoughts and questions, and particularly thinking about, like, it's all very well in theory, but what's it like applying it in the real world? How does it fit into your day-to-day? Can you see it fitting in well? Can you see challenges? It'd be great to hear from you guys.
I can definitely see it fitting in well with delivery. It's quite an obvious one. We have a fairly defined process. By visualizing it, we can see bottlenecks. I think it's a pretty good fit for that.
I think the benefit as well is that we don't, or my understanding is that we don't have to go up to the board 10 times a day and move things around, but that we review it together for 15 minutes. It's not a huge commitment for anyone on the team, but it will really help everyone get a better idea of everyone else's work.
Yeah, I think also the lean setup is good for the visualization workflow, just as part of that. How's it going? What are we doing? Is there anything we can change? Rather than saying this is it. They're still thinking in more of a way to kind of tweak it and adjust it to make it fit us really.
What's the key difference between lean and Kaizen?
Kaizen is the process of continuous improvement, and lean is basically a kind of like a workflow philosophy, which is essentially like a way of expressing what the Toyota philosophy is. So the Toyota production system contains this principle of Kaizen. So Kaizen is the loop of continuous improvement that sits within the broader kind of
big focus on no wastage, isn't there? The way that things are arranged.
So specifically, like the improvement should, like in Toyota is always about saying we're always seeking to remove waste. So each time we run this, our goal should be to have a more efficient workflow at the end. But that's one of the interesting things like about the horizons of the balanced scorecard, because it's actually saying, well, actually, you know, what is our goal for this piece of work? Is it financial? You know, is it the impact on the customer? Is it the impact on the kind of the work, on the product? Is it the impact on the culture of the organisation? You know, what is it that we're going to improve when we do this? Because we're always seeking to improve. We're not seeking with any experimental way things with us.
So I totally see how this makes sense when looking at certain contexts, but so when I think about particularly sort of broader context of the business as a whole, I see a danger with this, which worries me, which doesn't mean it's not a useful tool, but it's just like something from my perspective that is really important, which is that there's a lot of things that are very important that are not measurable at all. And the reason why, so my intuition...
For instance...
For instance, culture. Like how well that culture is doing. How do you put a scorecard on that? How do you put a score on
I
that?
think you can have indicators though.
You can have indicators,
so like
but...
how happy people are, retention rates, like stuff like that could indicate.
Yeah, there's some indicators and stuff, but they're going to measure very tiny slices, and there's a natural danger whenever you measure something, especially when you're trying to optimize for that thing, that you then optimize against the other things that are not measurable. And the other things that are not measurable might be just as important, if not more important. And measurements, to me, is something to always be very careful about. And actually, a lot of the initial work of getting the culture to where it is was based around this concept that actually these objective measurements are not complete enough and can be distorting to the behavior of people who would otherwise balance things in a more intuitive way. Everybody has their own balanced scorecard, but it includes a kind of intuitive understanding of something that's not measurable. That again, like customer service, you can come up with some objective measures around customer service. That's another one. Yes, you can do surveys and stuff like that. They are very thin slices of what customer service is actually about. The bulk of it is not measurable, and just because you have a few indications of, well, based on the survey that we did afterwards, people told us that we're doing okay, doesn't mean, doesn't represent the overall picture that accurately. And I'm just, I'm not saying that means that the balanced scorecard model is not useful, but I feel like there's a danger worth pointing out to get kind of lost in trying to measure everything you can measure, and then sort of lose track of all the vast array of things that are really important that you can't measure, or that are so expensive to measure that you end up not wanting to bother to measure them. So I just wanted to get that idea.
And indeed you have done, and thank you for that. But one of the things that you said there was kind of everybody has a balanced scorecard in their head, and they just sort of instinctively work on that, and that's super when you're one person. But we're 25 people trying to work together on some stuff. So if the stuff that if the things that are the successful outcome of a particular piece of work are locked in my head, it's quite hard for other people to put another piece of work alongside that, or to work with me on that. So like for instance, the kind of different product innovations that we're looking at the moment. If we want to have a kind of stuff that we're doing for the higher value clients to show them how we're adding value to their work, alongside actually the idea of, well, maybe we're going to do a kind of self-servicing. It's like, how are we going to compare and coordinate and understand what's going on there? And like the objective mapping and seeing them side by side and being actually, do these things sit together? Do they bring us to the same destination? Do they work against each other? Starting to think in that way together.
Definitely, but I guess what I'm trying to say is be aware that all we're building there is a map, and the map is not the territory, and let's not confuse the two. And the map is inherently not going to be, I'm sure other people are, I don't know, are other people familiar with the idea of the map is not the territory? It's a kind of phrase. No? Okay, so the idea is that,
it means that the map is not the territory, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's kind of obvious if you know what it means, but the point is that we use, and this is something we do as humans constantly, is we discuss concepts and we talk, there's a famous painting by Magritte, Ceci n'est pas une pipe, like this is not a pipe. The idea is not the thing. The balanced scorecard is not the process. It's just a map of one perspective on the process, which can be really useful. But the problems can occur when you lose track of the fact that this is just a map, and you think all we need to care about is the map, and you lose track of the fact that it's a map, it's imperfect, it's not direct, representation of reality. There might be things we're missing, measurements might be imprecise, the statistics we've done, and there's all sorts of things that can go wrong in this mapping between the map and the territory. And so long as you're aware that these things can go wrong, and so you keep your intuitive map also about you are less likely to be caught into just optimizing something that maybe has lost some of its connection to reality. I guess that's the idea I was trying to get out there.
I think that it's like you say, like it is important to remember that it's just a map. It's just a framework, right? And it's kind of like the database. It's only going to be as good as the information you actually put into it.
And it's not sacred.
Yeah. But then you can kind of turn back to the idea of continuous improvement, right? Is to keep, like that map doesn't have to be static. You can constantly say, what measure is important to us this month? Is this other measure no longer really that relevant? And I think if you, like you say, bear in mind that it's not the thing, like it's just the concept or the measure of the thing. But I think as long as you have, like, maybe saying it's not sacred is almost a mistake. Like that's almost setting yourself up to fail. Like if you keep it up to date and you have good realistic ways or good indicators that you appreciate or good indicators, you could have a really good map that's dynamic, that goes with your emergent strategy. It's something I would really be interested for us to try as a business.
Absolutely, and I'm not disagreeing with that.
I mean, you're absolutely right that there is a danger inherent in measuring, and at the very fundamental level of the universe, when you measure something, you change it. Right? There's a basic principle, but we are measuring stuff already. Like Sheehan's wonderful snapshot is a measure of where we are financially, and we're circulating that measure. And people are going to go, oh, we're doing well or badly on the basis of this, which is the only measure that we currently have. So the point about the balanced scorecard, bear in mind this is sitting in, like the discipline, the American discipline of kind of management, particularly, which is very kind of data-driven, like, financially, like shareholder value, strongly shareholder value-oriented kind of culture, or has been, ruthless, some might say. And this is about saying, actually, there are some other things that matter as well, and if we want to be able to take them into account at the same time as financial performance, we have to put some measure on them so we can say how we're doing, And like that measure might be imperfect, but it might be useful. And I certainly in my head thinking about like where we are kind of with like culture and how that sits on top of our kind of operational structures. And I think, I don't know how I would do that for this. How would we measure that? But at the same time, there was stuff that has happened before. People have said, how long is the process of transformation of GrantTree into an open culture organisation? How long is that going to take? Where are we on that journey? And actually to be able to say, well, today we're, we're at score X, and actually 6 months ago we were at score Y. So you see, there is actually some change here that's happened. Although, because if you remember last year, we had a situation where we were when we were starting to have kind of big changes in organisation, it was because we made a lot of small initial steps. And because each individual step was small, we didn't really have a tangible sense of how far we'd come until you sort of turn back and do that. And actually, maybe for something like culture, maybe the measure is more qualitative. Maybe it isn't quantitative measure. Maybe you can't put a number on it. But maybe you can say, we should be measuring where we are with the culture by having one kind of quarterly review of that, where we say, right, this is the kind of thing that we were doing then. This is the kind of thing that we're doing now. This is a change. This is a change.
And there's where I would point again to the danger there, which is nowhere more visible than in this American style of management with the shareholder value and so on, where the big issue with the system there is that you end up having the entire management of the company that's driven by a quarterly reporting cycle that drives the share price, and they end up generally sacrificing the long-term viability of the company to boost the share price on a quarterly basis. And you have CEOs who come in and stay for like 3 years, boost the share price, leave the company that's broken, and get paid because they raise the share price in the 3 years. That's a great example of a measurement that seems to be widely accepted and does map to something sensible, which is really completely broken because all the focus becomes on the measurement, and people, because the measurement is there and it's a thing they can measure, and they can't measure the long-term viability in the company in the same way, they end up focusing on what they can measure. That's just because we're human. It's not because people are evil or something. They just focus on what they can see. And if the measurement is there but it's missing a lot of the picture, and we don't constantly remind ourselves that, hey, it's just a measure, and if we allow it to become a motivational measure, for example, if we do what you say, we say, well, we can't measure most of the stuff about the culture, so we're going to do a survey of how happy people are, and we're going to try and get that survey to go up. That actually, I would say, is a mistake, because that is precisely the kind of partial measurement situation which, if you start to have a motivational measure around that single slice of the job, you end up distorting behavior and ignoring certain things that should get more attention in favor of the things that you can measure. So that's the danger that I see there.
Yeah, and I think one of the things is that this is obviously, it's a very orange system. Because the point is, like, the orange paradigm of companies are management by KPI, right? Achievement orange. That's what it is in the Reinventing Organizations framework.
That's why you have an orange slide.
It's a subconscious bias, right? So because there is this because it is this thing that fits very heavily into the orange framework, this is a question for us. In the more integrative kind of both and not everything important can be measured, we don't want to distort things with false measurements framework of Teal, how do we make this kind of stuff work for us? Because the process of saying, set out with a goal, run a short iterative cycle, and then see where you are in relationship to that goal is, I think, a really powerful way of thinking about stuff. And also saying, minimize that cycle to the shortest possible thing. Try and get feedback of some kind in the shortest possible time. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the frameworks are about saying, where this exists, are about saying, put a numerical measure on that. Or we might say, actually, numerical measures don't work, or this is how we're going to make numerical measures work. It's not to say that Teal organizations don't have KPIs, it's just one of the trends is obviously that they tend to have more holistic, KPIs across the whole business. So a useful KPI, for instance, on the work of tax credit delivery is not how many claims did you file, because we've seen that distorts the level of service. But actually it's about, one useful measure might be to say, what was the impact over the last month on cost of delay? Because, what did we do? Because actually we might say we can do better by focusing our attention on filing fewer claims but getting them filed and not starting so much work that we're not actually ready to complete. Which is kind of counterintuitive. Finding the right measure is super useful, and for us as an organisation there's a challenge and an opportunity here, which is to say, can we make a kind of measured approach to stuff work in a Teal environment? Let's see. Maybe we can come up with a meta measure of whether or not this has had a positive or negative impact on the code.
I think it's like a balance, isn't it? Because I see the value of both. I think on a macro level, having those key measurements is quite important as a business going forward in general. But then at the same time, because of this Teal culture, perhaps it shouldn't be transcended into a microscopic level. Because again, like Dan says, it might just streamline the process a lot more to just figures and metrics. But I do see the value of what you're saying as well. With this is what we were, and this is where we are now, and having those key figures helps us to see where the improvements are.
Yeah, I think that's probably less dangerous. So this is where we were, and this is where we are now is probably very useful. What's probably so based on, there's a really good book on the shelf upstairs, I think, which I recommend that you read since you're very interested in this. The great mouthful of measuring and managing performance in organizations, which points out that there is this very clear that it's a proven problem with measurement systems that they distort behavior in this way in partial measurement situations, which is the case that we have here. And the way the distortions creep in is whenever you allow these systems to become motivational. So long as they're just there for awareness, like measuring the finances of the company and just getting the finance snapshot from Shein is great. We get to see how we're doing. Starting to say, okay, we're going to just motivate ourselves just by Shein's snapshot, and that's going to be the thing we try to we start to measure everything related to Shein's snapshot. Suddenly we introduce also distortions in the company by doing this. So when you say, let's measure these things and look back, oh, this is where we are today, this is where we were 3 months ago. That's really interesting. When you start to say, and we want to be here in 3 months, let's go and make it happen that we're here in 3 months, that's when you enter the danger zone. where you need to be really careful.
Yeah, it's very much, this process is very much about saying we're going to try something, and then the measurement is going to tell us, did we move in the direction that we wanted, or did we move somewhere else? And that data, that measurement, might not be like a number. It might be we spoke to 5 customers who we might offer this to, and none of them wanted it.
Yeah.
Okay.
But
That's exactly what I was going to say. Like the measurement, it doesn't have to be financially kind of like motivated. It could be like more of a intuitive, intrinsic value.
But then, so for example, one of the ways that the danger can creep in is you say, okay, we're going to try this thing, and I'm going to hope that it succeeds. And then somebody has a great idea and say, oh well, you know what? If we do succeed, maybe we all go out for dinner to celebrate. Danger zone. You've introduced a motivational measurement. You start to introduce distortions. I mean, there's a chance that you introduce distortions, basically the moment you make it motivational. So we all need to be aware of this if we're going to be creating the system together, basically.
But then I see that as like, that's where the goal comes in. So if we all set a goal that we want to kind of like strive towards, that could be the motivation rather than the reward after reaching the goal.
Nikki?
I think the temptation though, so I see your point, but I think it's natural for people to look at the indicator of whether that goal has been achieved. So then you go back to measures. And I think like dysfunctional behavior and metrics, it's a well-documented thing, right? That's why there's like corporate governance, or some of corporate governance measures are exactly to get around that like agency problem. But the thing is that I think as much as you can say like maybe we don't want to have this thing be a motivation, I think there's an argument for human nature looking for a motivator naturally. Like people want to just, like it can be anything. Like this week I'm going to answer all my emails in under 3 hours, and people create their own little motivation tools anyway. So I kind of feel like for me that's a driving force for saying, you know what, let's find really good measures and then ensure that people focus on these really good measures instead of creating their own. Because sales numbers, things like that, like they naturally just become motivators.
But to use your example of I'm going to answer as many emails as I can in 3 hours, that's a measure which can be really motivational for you, and you've chosen to do it, and you know it's bullshit, and you know that if you hit an email there and you realize shit. Sorry?
Maybe I don't know it's bullshit.
Okay, but you know that if you hit an email there in the middle and you were like, you'd set yourself the objective, I'm going to answer, and you hit an email there and you're like, oh shit, so this is a client that's really upset, there's all this kind of stuff that's gone wrong there, you're going to suddenly throw out your measure and say, this is prioritized above the measure that I came up with. And you've got that agency of deciding to change your measure. Whereas if it's like 15 people are using this measure and they've kind of put it on a pedestal almost that this is the measure that we care about, and you hit a situation where actually you should throw that measure out and do something else, you'll have more reluctance to do so, and that's probably, I'm imagining that's where the distorting effects start to come in.
Yeah.
Daisy wants to say something.
It's sort of like something that occurred to me like a minute, 2 minutes ago as you were talking, when you're talking about like motivating factors and things that you can measure to reach goals. Like, I think this was the kind of, for me, the whole purpose, and was achieved to a large extent, the whole point when we all got together and decided on our purpose. To me, that is like, that's the end goal, and that should be what everyone in the company finds motivating, and if they don't, then we haven't got it right, because I think that's the whole point, the purpose of the purpose.
I think we haven't really reinforced it though, have we?
Focus squared.
We haven't like gone round and reached goal, no.
We spoke about it that day, and then
Here we go
it's
again.
come up with a couple of things, but
It's been mentioned, but we haven't like put time aside to reiterate it to the point where everyone's happy with it.
I think for me the thing that I want to draw attention to here is that actually it's about like the goal is the thing that comes first. What do we want to, what is the thing that we want to achieve, and the metric is about saying, well, okay, that's what we want to achieve. How will we know when we have done that? What is the thing that will tell us when that has happened? Then we do something, then we come back to the data that we have. So maybe we could sort of, instead of saying measure, maybe the word measure is problematic. Maybe we could just say that it's about a metric, how will we know when we've done it, trying something out, having some data and comparing it to see, did it have the impact that we wanted it to have, or did it do something else? And knowing that, what are we going to do? Are we going to pivot or persevere? Are we going to carry on doing the same thing, or are we going to try something else?
I think that sort of shows that the goals that if we were to like take this out like the circle, it seems to me like the first thing we do would be to ask everyone in the company what the goal is, which is kind of like the blue sky thinking when we started a long time ago talking about purpose. Because the goal to me, like something like helping people and businesses to achieve their potential is so subjective and it's never going to be finished. I mean, it's just helping. You can't, there's no goal in that. So that would probably be a good start, would be to ask people in the company what they actually want to achieve.
But also, this is not just about the kind of like, you know, like in the Toyota thing where there's the kind of two goals, right? There's the long-term vision goal, which is the kind of purpose goal, but then the short-term goals for an individual project. You know, like we're going to try doing pair work for Verify because why? You know, what is success going to look like? It was because we think it will get work out of the door quicker, because we think that it will increase learning for less experienced members of the team. Okay, great. So what we want to be able to do is to, after that, actually be able to get together in a group and say, okay, we have these two things that would mean that we have done what we wanted to do. Where are we with those two things?
Yeah, I think with something like that as well though, with trying something like that, if what we want is increased efficiency in getting the claims out the door, we need like a standard before, like it needs to be measured before we've actually changed it, because now it's too late. We don't know how long it really takes us. You know, we need a stopwatch, like something to actually tell us how long it was taking us before, because now we've already started this experiment, it's too late to actually compare.
Well, not necessarily, because you can always do split testing. You can always have a group who do it the old way and a group who do it the new way, and you know, see actually who finds things move quicker. But you do, I mean, like, yeah, for that specific project and that specific measure, if we wanted to, if we really wanted to do that, what we would want is everybody on visual workflow, so that we can actually say, like, Group A are on this workflow, Group B are on this workflow. Look at how much smoother it's moving in A or B. We don't know which it's going to be.
I think that might actually be a really good example of focusing on the wrong thing, because so like our objective is we want to get claims out the door as quickly as we can, and we want to increase learning in the team. So why should we know how fast they're going out now, so that when we do the thing and we measure, like, what does that number really mean to us? Like, it's actually more about like, are we happy with how it's going now? Are these claims going out the door as quickly as we would like? If they're just going quicker than they used to, that might actually sort of take some pressure off looking at the situation where we are and saying, are we happy with how it is now? Because that number, like the difference between a month ago and now, it's kind of arbitrary. Do you see what I mean?
I mean,
it shows improvement, but it's focusing on the wrong thing.
That's a variability in just the measurement process itself. That's one of the problems that I've mentioned about it.
Because I think, okay, so the thing that's important, if you think about the goal is we want to get claims out the door fast. Okay, there's the learning thing as well that we'll drop back for now. And we're saying, okay, our goal is to achieve this thing. So then we make some changes, and then at some point we will review the situation to see if we've achieved our goal. And I think that in that example, the difference from where we were to where we are doesn't actually matter.
Why?
Because it just shows some improvement. It doesn't indicate that we are achieving the goal, which is to get the claims out as fast as we can.
How does it not show that?
It just shows what's changed.
Yeah, but if it's got faster,
It-
then
it-
it shows.
It doesn't mean that we've achieved our goal in full. It just means like maybe we're on our way to the goal.
No, but if the goal is to get claims out the door faster, and the results show that we're getting them out the door faster, then I don't understand.
Okay, so in that case, then there's room for that number being insufficient. So if we just get all our claims out the door 2 days faster, then we've achieved the goal. But maybe there's scope for even more improvement. So what I'm saying is,
yeah, but that's because it's a continuous
just
cycle. So we only have a goal for one cycle. So it's like what we want in this cycle, it's going to last 3 weeks. Is
so this is a number that I think doesn't mean anything to us. If the claims are going out a day faster every week, this is a quantitative measure that doesn't look at the whole view. So we want to get our claims out the door faster, but this is then, the risk is then our quality goes down.
well, of course,
So that's the partial measurement.
But that's
all other things
yeah.
equal, I still think that it's right to do that, to actually measure.
So
Sure, but this is an example of where you need the balanced view. So, is our quality still good? Is, there are some other things that are happening, like, so focusing on this number, like our claims now go out 2 days faster than they did last month. I think it's a mistake to focus on that number, but rather look at what's the state.
It's all part of the process, isn't it? Because I feel like if you were to, be analysing whether, the claims going out the door faster is a good thing, you would have to make sure that all else is equal, because if you felt that there was a drop in standards in something else, then yeah, I get what you mean now. You can't just stick to the one measure because there's other things that you care about.
Yeah. It's sort of supporting Dan's earlier point.
Can I request something? I mean, we don't have most of the client management team here, and I'm worried about the measure being lost and like confused for the thing and so on, the map for the territory and so on. And what would make me sleep at night easier if there was actually, as part of this process, a kind of constant reminder that, hey, this is just a measure, it's not measuring everything, and part of your process of working in this process is to keep thinking back to the overall process and saying, has this process become detached from reality? Has it become bullshit? Like, is it missing something important? Am I just about to do something that's wrong for the... Like, that should be the question that you ask yourself constantly is this actually right? Or am I just following a measure?
But yeah, exactly. Like there's a thing here where we're all saying the same thing. But there's a kind of an artificial conflict happening, which is that the purpose of the measure...
Just like fighting.
The purpose of the measure is to tell us, hey, we want to, why do we want to do this pair work, right? Because we think it's going to make the workflow more efficient. We think it's going to allow us to do more. Now, is it helpful for us to just sort of say, did we think that let us do more? Yes. Does everything think yes? Okay, great. I mean, that's a shitty kind of way of measuring whether or not it did that thing, as opposed to saying, this is what we wanted to achieve. To help us know where we are with that, we have a couple of measures that we can look at, which says, work that moved in the morning into claim prepared, which is the stage. The goal of this is to do two things in this process: maintain the relationship and get the client paid and us paid, and everything that we're doing is trying to achieve that, and we have to think in terms of the impact on that. Because the point about the pair verifying is that it is locally inefficient to have two people doing it, or to have the person who's holding the work say, I'm not going to pick up another task until you're ready for verifying this. And what we're trying to make sense of is, does that make it better to do it that way, even though it's counterintuitive? So if we can put in something that can allow us to know where we are after that, are we moving towards the thing that we hoped it would do for us in spite of the counterintuitive nature? But we're not working to the measure, we're working to the goal. The goal is just the thing that helps us orient ourselves. It is, as you say, the map, that's where we're going. Okay, where are we now in relation to that? Are we closer to it or further away? Or, well, let's consult a map to get a sense.
But use your senses as well at the same time. If there's somebody lying in the middle of the road, maybe you ignore the map for a little while and drive around them.
Drive around them, don't get out of the home.
But no. That's false, because the point is that what we're trying to say is the thing that we're doing is we're going to work in pairs to verify stuff because we believe it's going to move work in a more efficient way.
I wasn't responding to that.
No, but that's a good goal, right? And what we're saying is, what's the measure that will tell us whether work has moved in a more efficient way? So there's not a point at which we're going to say, well, let's abandon that measure or goal because there's an emergency. It's like, if we think that this is the better way of doing it,
it's a fine line, and I think as long as you're aware of the fact that there's this fine line between letting the measure become motivational and start to cause distortions versus actually just using the measure to get some better awareness of the impact of what we do, as long as you're constantly aware of that, it works great. If you lose track of the fact that there's this danger, you can then fall into the, we need to get the claims out faster. Why don't we just cut the verify process? Or I'll just verify it a bit quicker. I'll give myself a 10-minute window to this verification and bam, the claims are out faster. But I think that one is pretty obvious. We can see the problem with that. But there's other ways that we can optimize the process.
Hey Justin.
That might not be quite so...
Hit us.
Hey guys.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
No.
Yes, we can hear you. Yeah, we can hear you.
It's a really interesting discussion. Just had a quick question to Dan. How do you think we can always sort of get the best of both worlds, like you were saying, like always keep an eye out for the qualitative stuff and not lose sight of what's important, but then still measure it? How do you think we get that balance?
I don't know is my answer, but the only way I can think of at the moment is to have this kind of constant reminder for yourself that I'm dealing with a map here, and I need to constantly use my own internal relationship with reality to check that the map is actually still useful, rather than ever falling into the belief that the map is the reality and that's what we're working on.
I'd like to add something to that as well. I think a good thing is to set the balanced scorecard type model of objectives as well, or measures. So, you know, the financial perspective is, you know, getting claims through as fast as possible. That you could measure that in that way because you'll see the value of claims. But at the same time, looking at the customer perspective, which is, do customers seem to be happy with the service? What are they saying? You know, if we get feedback from our clients. And then you also have like I think it's the innovation and learning perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Then you can look at, are people actually learning new skills? Are we all feeling more comfortable doing complicated parts of it? So if you set these really good measures that are balanced, I think that's one good way, and they're balanced and they're also both qualitative and quantitative.
What occurs to me from listening to you there is that actually one interesting trick might be to deliberately design measures that are contradictory with each other.
Yeah.
Which sounds counterintuitive because you want everything to make sense, but actually if you make the map deliberately not make sense, then you're less likely to fall into the trap of thinking, oh, this map is actually a perfect map of the world. No, it actually has stuff that you can't actually optimize the map. Like, I think it naturally, there's measures that are incompatible with each other. They're both valid from different perspectives, then that forces you to take different perspectives and to not assume that the map is the truth.
I mean, the more sophisticated, like the system, the balancing loop stuff that I was talking about, like actually one of the things that's like, because in the linkage map, which links together the objectives and how they kind of fit in with each other, and it links the objectives rather than the measures, right? The measures just tell us where we are with the objectives, give us a sense of that. One of the evolution of that to the kind of like the balancing loop thing is to say that, yeah, you might have this that pushes you this way and that pushes you that way, and that actually systems often do rely on, you know, like for instance, you know, this room doesn't have a thermostat because those are about the temperature of the air, but a room that has a thermostat, you know, like pump out heat and then the thermostat tells you to stop, and then you pump out heat and the thermostat tells you to stop or stop or stop, and you have this thing where you've got push pull and the two things pull against each other dynamically.
But those are still looking at the world in the same perspective, not in contradictory perspectives. I'm trying to think of a tangible example of that, but it would be like part of it looking at
quality and speed, you know, like of work. There's a constant push.
That's still within the same mental framework, though.
But the quality and speed pull against each other. In you know, as an optimization.
Yeah, I don't know, I'll try and think of some. I can't think off the top of my head like this. I'll think about it over the next week or something.
But in some ways, I just sort of think saying, okay, well, let's have a tool that we want to help us kind of think together about these things in a more systematic, coordinated surface rather than just locked in people's heads kind of ways. Okay, great. And let's make it fundamentally contradictory so that when people start using it, they get lost. I don't know.
Fair point.
I think like an example I can think of from past work experience is in a relatively small team, you have some salespeople who go out and try to sell a product, and they're selling in a market where longer terms is something that people are constantly asking for. And then assigned sort of to that sales team is a credit controller who has to keep down the day's sales outstanding. So the salesperson's sales process relies on being able to give a client 60 or 90 days to pay, and the credit controller's targets mean that everybody needs to pay on like day 29. That's it. And then it's like finding, and I've worked in this sort of experience before where it's about finding a set of objectives that are well balanced, so maybe not contradictory, but just in some sort of harmony with each other, that says, okay, well, we will measure sales made and we will measure days sales outstanding, but we will also measure something else that's like the trade-off, like the perceived risk that we're taking on. or you know, there's like something that kind of links the two. And maybe it's something else like with the size of orders that clients are placing, or they're coming back and doing repeat orders, and how that balances against the terms that they were given and how quickly they ended up paying, and then the perceived risk of. Do you see what I mean? I think that those are people within a team who are pulling or pushing in completely opposite directions, but finding good measures that sort of harmonize those and find the sweet spots.
I think we might be going off topic a little bit for this talk, and it's probably time to let people get back to work. But just when you mentioned this, occurs to me that we have an example of a system where they are trying to solve this, which is most governments, which have which use the checks and balances thing, which is similar to what you say, where different people have different objectives operating on the same system, with the judicial department has a completely different perspective on the world than, say, the executive or the legislative, and they work together but from very different angles, and they have kind of a balanced score. I guess somebody has a balanced scorecard of the overall system.
Okay.
Maybe. I don't know.
All right, cool beans, everyone. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Andrew.